So welcome everyone. My name is Julienne van Loon and I'm the Creative Practice Advisor for the School of Media and Communication. And I've been in this particular role on and off for 4 or 5 years. And I have invited people from outside our school to this session as well. So it may be that there are people from all over DSC here, and welcome to everybody. There was a session earlier this year for HDRs and ECRs on, demystifying NTROs or publishing creative works and so on. And this particular session is more oriented towards staff. There are some differences in the way NTRO data collection particularly works with HDRs versus staff. So we're really aiming for this session to be directed towards staff in an ERA kind of round era, where it's really important that we are collecting any of the outputs that people are doing. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes, and then I'm going to pass on to Winnie Ha Mitford, who's joining us from the research publications and data collection area. And then Winnie will speak for 10 minutes or so about how all this works within RMIT. And then we'll hear from Stefanie Markidis, who's working at the library these days and is available to help people with putting together or conceiving of their research statements and working on them and editing them. So Steph will talk for about 10 minutes as well. And around 1 o'clock, we'll open up to Q&A. So with only 10 minutes to talk, I'm not going to be able to go into a huge amount of detail, but I'll just start sharing my screen, which hopefully you can see. And I'm just going to give a bit of a big picture introduction to how this works. And so the idea is that I'll sort of start at the top, and then Winnie will talk more about the within RMIT aspects, and then Steph more particularly about your particular kind of articulation of your outputs with a research question, research statement and so on. So I wanted to start at the sort of bigger picture with all these fantastic acronyms at the national level. I often hear people say, oh, you know, we've got a lot of acronyms at RMIT, but they actually in our sector as a whole. So I wanted to kind of reference and make sure that you are aware of the kind of national policy arrangements that impact on the way we are required to sort of authenticate and report our research. And so the universities basically are funded by these RBGs, research block grants, which come out of this Higher Education Support Act. So that's the RGB and HESA. And through a particular formula, there are some people waiting in the lobby that I just need to admit, or perhaps someone else could do that for me. Hang on, there we go. So it's with quite complex formulas that universities are given grants to support research. And this is one reason why it's really important that research data is collected. So if you forget to report stuff, it does actually impact the university's funding model. And the what I'd really want to kind of impress upon you is the importance of being across some of these guidelines. So at the top, we've got that block grant, which is funded in a certain way, but that goes on to impact what they call HERD-C specifications. So all these kind of policy documents all fit together. And what I'd like to encourage you to do, particularly those of you who've recently come from industry into the university sector, is to be across, in particular, the HERD-C guidelines. So HERD-C stands for Higher Education Research Data Collection, and the specifications change each year. And those guidelines define what research is and what counts and what doesn't count. And it's really important to just at least be across the section of the HERD-C guidelines that talk about the definition of research, and to think about that in relation to your own research practice. So the other bigger picture kind of policy that is relevant here is the ERA policy, and just history lesson in a couple of minutes. When I first started teaching in universities in the 1990s as a creative writing academic, creative works were not counted. There was no way to report that data. Herd C didn't include creative works as, I think maybe somebody's got their mic on who needs to turn it off. There's a little bit of background noise happening there. And so there was no way to kind of qualify or quantify work that we were doing that was creative practice. And Herd C was very oriented towards quantity, so recording which outputs university academics were producing, but it wasn't very attuned to quality. So ERA, the Excellence in Research Australia kind of set of policies and projects, came along to try and address in particular the quality of research by using a peer-reviewed approach and looking right across the country at promoting excellence and comparing one university to another in particular disciplines. And so this is the project that happens every 3 to 5 years. There's an ERA round and all of the universities fall over themselves to try and get all their data in order, and it's presented to objective peers from other universities and rated according to a ranking of sort of 1 to 5, 5 being, the most outstanding and excellent quality, and 1 being, not very great. So luckily for those of us in the creative arts, ERA was the first opportunity for us to be visible and for us to be peer reviewed. And so it's been a really, really wonderful thing for the creative arts. We have our own code, we have our own peer assessors in the ERA process. And as with the Herd C guidelines, though, there are particular policy documents that are set nationally that we need to understand as academics working in this area. So again, this slide set will be accessible to you after the session, and I've put a link here to the current ERA submission guidelines, and you just absolutely have to be across those as an academic who's producing ERA eligible non-traditional research outcomes. You need to understand what it means for your discipline and what it means for your own practice. So I encourage you to read the section. You don't have to be a policy expert, a Herd C expert, an ERA expert, but you do need to be across those couple of important pages in those documents that tell us what's eligible and what's not, and what what qualifies and what's not. Because I feel like sometimes people think it's the the local people like me within the school that are making the rules up, but that they're actually national policy settings, and it's a research integrity issue, but also a an institutional requirement that we follow the guidelines that have been set. I don't want to talk too much, so I'm just keeping a quick eye on the time. So my key sort of points to kind of take away from that, I hope you can take away from this session, is to go back to those policy documents, read them again. I reread them all the time. It's not something that you can read once and fully understand. You need to kind of think about these definitions and what qualifies and what's not, what doesn't qualify, kind of over and again. So I encourage you to go back to those documents even if you've read them before. But my other key point is really to talk to each other. So if you're planning non-traditional research outputs, it's really important that you speak with your peers in your discipline about what makes a good NTRO, what makes a good statement to go alongside that, and to think about who the leaders are in your discipline in terms of non-traditional research outputs, whether they're internal or external to RMIT, it doesn't matter. Find out who they are and talk to one another about, what does dodgy NTRO reporting look like in your discipline? Because the whole purpose of the excellence, aspect of the ERA is that we need to put our best foot forward as an institution, but also as a discipline. And I think sometimes, it's important to remember that there are people in national higher education research policy who are not, frankly, not that friendly towards the humanities and the creative arts. And we don't want to give those people any excuse to cut us out of the pie again. We don't want to end up back in that situation. So it's really important that what we're doing is thinking robustly, talking to one another seriously and in some depth about what good non-traditional research outputs look like in our field, and who can we learn from? And there's really a great deal of information out there now. RMIT has a really great research repository that contains all the non-traditional research outputs, or the evidence of them, not in some cases not the literal work, it depends what kind of work it is, but there's evidence of that work there, there's statements there, and a lot of other universities are doing the same. So I was just having a little bit of a poke around on some other sites this morning, and if you've got somebody in mind, you know, like I can think in my own discipline, I think of people like Maria Tumarkin at the University of Melbourne, I think of people like Ross Gibson at the University of Canberra, and I think, well, what are they doing and how do they articulate that wonderful work of theirs that I'm familiar with? And 9 times out of 10 you can go and find out. The ERA data is now being published by the ARC. It's a little bit sort of patchy as to what you can actually get access to within there, but it's not that hard to figure out what people at other universities in your discipline are doing. And this business about kind of in your discipline, you know, what's right for your discipline is really important, because in the peer review, which is the process that we go through with ERA every 3 to 5 years, it's experts in the discipline who are judging what is, you know, writing and publishing at RMIT like, you know, what's the quality of the work that's going on there. So those are my key kind of 3 points, and I'm going to pass on now over to Winnie. But really, in a nutshell, get to know the national policies that relate to the kind of research practice that you're doing. Speak to your peers in the discipline and look for good models. I'm going to just stop sharing my screen now and pass over to Winnie.
Thank you. Thanks, Julia, for the wonderful overview. I am going to share my screen now, and I will turn off my video so I don't distract myself. Hang on a minute. Okay. Can everyone see my screen?
Not yet, but maybe it's taking a minute to come.
Let me. Okay, let's try this. Is that all right?
Yes, there we go.
Okay. Great. So what I'll do is I will talk mainly about the processes for submission within RMIT. But before that, I will quickly just talk a little bit about ERA 2023, which is what we're preparing for as a university. So 2023, so we are expecting the guidelines to be released in the first half of next year. So at the moment, we are still collecting works based on 2018 guidelines. We don't expect a lot of changes, but one key thing to remember, to note, is ARC is looking to change the way we rate, the rating scale of 1 to 5. We don't know how it's going to change, but just something to note. And also, you may know of the reference to the notion of world standard within that rating scale, where 3 is a rating of a discipline at world standard, a rating of 4 is above world standard, and a rating of 5 is well above world standard. Now that term world standard is quite confusing for many reasons, so they are looking to shift that slightly as well. It'll be interesting to see what they come up with. In terms of what we are collecting for 2023, we are collecting all research outputs published from the 1st of Jan 2016 to the 31st of December this year. So anything that's published in that time frame will be, you can submit, and we will consider it for ERA eligibility. The other thing to note is for ERA assessment, which we send to the ARC, RMIT will construct the top 30% sample of all NTRO outputs. It will be the top 30% for each 4-digit FRR, which 4-digit field of discipline. So I'll explain a bit more about field of discipline in my next few slides. So these are some of the changes to ERA 2023. We are shifting to new 2020 FOR codes, which is a code for each unit of discipline at various levels. You can download the Excel spreadsheet from this PowerPoint. So if you are familiar with submitting works through the online form, you know how it asks you for your nominated field research. Well, now you can actually select from the new codes. And to see the conversion from the old code to the new codes, you can also just go to that spreadsheet or the ABS website. There is a new FOI division for 2023, which is Indigenous Studies. This will be a cross-college, university-wide body of work. The leaders for this area, actually there are two leaders, they're both from DSC, and they will be looking after collating works that fall under this new category. And I said before, there's looking to be a new rating scale and new benchmarks, removal of apply measures, that's not a very important point. They are also looking to improve the peer review evaluation methodology, and that will come out in the second half of next year in the peer review handbook. So why do we collect NTROs? So the main reason is for traditional output or traditional publication like a scholarly book or a journal article, there is often very explicit and obvious critical scholarly argumentation supported by a thorough reference list. With NTROs, all of that is not as explicit. So when we submit an NTRO or a creative work, we require more of a package. So the package will include documentation of the actual work and the research statement, which is the important part, and Steph would cover this in her segment. They require the research statement to make the research aspect of the NTRO very explicit. And then what you do is you support the statement with evidence of research excellence, including peer review or equivalent. And I'll go through that in a bit more detail as well. And always we come back to the idea that the reason why we package the creative work is to identify the research component and for it to meet ERA's definition of research. So how does an NTRO constitute research? So these are the basic requirements. As I said before, the work has to be made publicly available. So what that means is you can't produce a work and have it sitting at home, and even though it is a legitimate research output, if it's not published or accessible to the public, then we can't submit it for ERA eligibility. This is, so when you submit a creative work, there are many different categories of outputs that you can submit it into. And this is an important part because submitting it into each of these categories has its own set of requirements. So for instance, within the original creative work category, you can submit anything from a visual art piece to a design or architectural work or a textual work. The piece has to be new, or it has to demonstrate a new or innovative interpretation or production of an existing work. So for media and comm researchers, in the category or the subcategory of textual work, you can submit novels, art reviews, exhibition catalogues, and scholarly translations, and other equivalent works. And those are the other various categories. I won't go into detail with that at the moment. If there are any questions, you can always pop it in the chat for me later. I wanted to talk a bit about the idea of portfolios. It's quite confusing for many reasons. Most people, or some people, use the portfolio category as a way to package up very minor works. It's not really, that's not really the purpose of a portfolio for ERA. A portfolio is a collection of research outputs, which on their own, on its own, may not stand as a single research output. But when you put them together, you can construct a very clear and explicit research narrative and research trajectory, and that becomes one single submission. You can consider a portfolio when the size of an individual creative work or the scope of the magnitude is not that substantial. And I mean, inevitably often comes down to what we'll see as minor works, but we do need to have each work be a research output in its own right. So the portfolio has to be supported by a single research statement, and the statement talks to the whole portfolio. And it has to talk about how the portfolio demonstrates research contribution, and also for example, also it can also be a series of multi-authored or collaborative works over a period of time, as long as you can show that they investigate or experiment or test a coherent research problem. So these are some hot tips for when you submit an NTRO at RMIT. Just some handy notes to have. If you've never done it before, please don't be overwhelmed. The first few submissions may take a little bit of getting used to, but I promise once you start getting used to the ROC, which is the Research Output Capture Form, it becomes pretty easy. So you can submit everything via the ROC form. You can pick your FOR code. The form actually has a drop-down list once you start putting in some numbers. With co-authors, if they're not from RMIT, unfortunately, you have to email us their names and their affiliation, and we will add them manually for you into the database. Number 4 is the self-assessment of research quality. I'll quickly talk about this. This could take a lot of discussion, but since the start of last year, the DSC Creative Works Policy Group initiated a project, was actually kind of prompted by Ralph Horn, to start to look at how we may find a way to rate or assess the quality of individual NTROs. I will actually pull up the page now. We do have an information page on the portal itself. I'll refer to it here. I'm not sure how many of you have seen this page, but so the idea behind this exercise is to find a way to evaluate NTROs with some equivalence to traditional works. So for example, a Q1 article could be equivalent to an ERA 4 or 5. And also, the important thing with this exercise is the attempt is to encourage more conversations across colleges and between staff, and also with your line managers in terms of how you could start talking about the scope and the size of a research project and the quality of the outcome or the output. It's a way to measure your creative research in work planning, in academic promotion applications, and it's a way to just have a consistent and objective way to talk about quality. It's a very fraught and it's a very difficult process. We're still working through the nuances and the grey areas, but this is a starting point. And I encourage everyone to have a read of this page and send us any feedback that you may have. So here we have the rating chart itself, which is rated 1 to 5. It follows the ERA framework. But what we've decided to do is to de-emphasize the notion of world standard, because that was causing confusion. So world standard doesn't mean, so for a 4 or 5 in ERA terms, it's a work that's well beyond or above world standard. And often people misunderstand that as being, well, if my work was shown at a gallery in Hong Kong, it's immediately more prestigious than a gallery in Melbourne. That's not the case. What we do look for is a range of quality indicators, as you can see here. And it's a balance of all of these indicators to come up with the final sort of indicative rating. So you could have a work at the NGV. it could be a solo exhibition at the NGV, which would be a great output, a very, very highly rated output, or it could be a single work that's affiliated loosely with the NGV. So the outlet itself it's not the primary indicator, by no means the primary indicator. So we're trying to get that message across, that it is about all of these indicators combined, and it's rated on a case-by-case basis. Let me just jump back to my PowerPoint. Okay, so here are some examples of peer review. Julienne mentioned this briefly in her segment. Often when you submit a creative work, we do want to see some evidence of how significant the peer review process or the selection process was, whether you received any competitive funding, whether you received any positive reviews of the work in credible publications. So you can think of it as a way of packaging a comprehensive and evocative profile of the work. And one thing to note, that a selection of the work by your colleagues or close associates is typically not considered adequate peer review. Adequate peer review has to be independent and at arm's length. So as this is about the research quality indicators, which I spoke about earlier. This is the actual form. If you haven't seen it before, that's the link up near the upper right-hand corner. When you click onto a creative work, this is the form that you get to. And now we do, sorry, someone just, oh, okay. So this is the schedule for 2021. We have 3 rounds of collection per year, but please note that we do collect works throughout. We just have these 3 rounds for the purposes of school reviews and college reviews, which happen 3 times a year. So if you submit, so we are at the moment, we're just finishing up with round 2. Round 3, we'll be making a call for submissions on the 4th of October. But if you submit something in September, that's totally fine. It will just have to wait till the 3rd of November for the schools to start reviewing them. So there is a bit of a wait. Yeah. So that's all I have for my bit. Here are some useful links. I will send Julienne and Marie this PowerPoint for dissemination after the event, so everyone can have access to it. All right, thank you, Julienne. I shall pass back to you.
Thanks so much. That was really comprehensive and a lot of information there for anybody who's new, but I feel like most of us in the room have had a go at this kind of thing, and it would be great to circulate the slides, so thanks for that, and we'll follow up with that after the session. So I'm going to introduce now Stefanie Markidis, who's an academic skills advisor with the library, and Steph is their specialist in creative practice research, and she's going to walk us through thinking about how to articulate, in particular, the research statement that sits alongside your NTRO. So over to you, Steph. Thank you.
Thanks, Julienne. I'm just going to pull up my slides. That might take a couple of seconds. And yeah, some of you in the room know me, but if not, that's right. I'm an academic skills advisor in the library and also a creative practice researcher, and here to talk to you about the research statement. So I'm going to try to keep this brief because I know we're attempting to have half the session for question time. But one thing I want to draw out about the research statement is something that Winnie's already mentioned around it, a narrative. And so maybe thinking about it as a narrative of what you've done and why that's important is a good way to approach it. And so the research statement needs to be included on the RAC, the Research Output Capture form. And it has 3 sections, which you probably already know about: the background, the contribution and significance. And all in all, it needs to be maximum 2,000 characters, including spaces. So when you're writing this, I suppose thinking about writing with clarity and also keeping your audience in mind. So you are writing for an expert audience, but not necessarily someone who's an expert in your field. So keep that in mind. So those 3 areas, I'll go through them. Firstly, the background. So that's the scholarly field, you know, the context of your question, the contribution, so what you did and what you're contributing, and the significance of why that matters. So you can see it, you know, it flows logically as a kind of trajectory or a narrative of research. Again, these slides will be sent to you, so you don't have to read sort of everything that's on the slide, but that can be a useful resource. The background is a matter of setting up the context and identifying that problem in the field. Not necessarily describing the background of your work, but more so the theoretical and the practice context around that kind of supports the question that you investigated. So this is the part of the statement where you can talk about other creative practice research or scholars who address the discipline or the question or the problem that you're looking at, and be specific about that. You know, drop some names. That's useful. In this slide pack, I've included some points and some prompts and questions that you can use when you're drafting each of these sections. And they've mainly been drawn from the researcher portal. So I have to give credit to Winnie here. So I won't go through these slides too much because you can just click through to the researcher portal and see that those prompts. But things like asking yourself, you know, have you identified a problem or a knowledge gap in this field? What exactly are those scholarly debates within your field? So thinking about that. Looking to some examples here, and I know some of the people whose examples I've used are actually in the room, so well done you. So this is David Carlin writing about the background to an essay that was submitted as an NTRO. And you can see him setting up the research field. So you've got the key scholars, key concepts, and then talking about, you know, providing a brief description of both the theoretical and the practice context. So talking about archival practices as relating to institutions of power, but then also an everyday archival practice. So talking, you know, about how that relates from, I suppose, that theoretical context into the making or the doing, and then articulating the research question. Moving on to the contribution. This is when you introduce your work and really, really importantly, talking about how it is research, which I guess kind of goes back to what Julienne was mentioning at the very start about how as a discipline or a field or an area of research, we have to do that work to articulate exactly how it is research. You know, we don't necessarily have those structures or supports built into the outcome itself. We have to articulate it and say this is how. So you have to do that really clearly. And if it's a collaborative work, you know, make sure you're being clear and specific about your role as the researcher. And this is where you talk about how that creative work addresses the problem. So that first section, you know, the research background, that's kind of like the lit review. And this is where you talk more specifically about what you did. And again, some prompts here. So, you know, how has the work generated new or expanded knowledge? You know, what is that specific contribution that you made, maybe to the community of practice? How would people benefit from this? So also highlighting some work here from Bridget Magner. And you can see that in this particular statement, the contribution section was quite, probably quite a bit larger than the other two. But she talks about, she uses the title in the first sentence, so drawing the, you know, speaking specifically about the work, describes it, and then follows that up with an explanation of how it contributes to the field, and not just, you know, not just how it contributes in general, but specifically to the field in an Australian context. And following that up with another sentence there talking about how it extends her research practice. And then finally, the research significance. So, you know, what you've done, but now why it matters. And really talking about, again, why it's significant to the field. Why does it matter to your particular research field, not necessarily the universe at large, but the narrow and specific area that you're researching in. And showing evidence of this, that's really important. So Winnie was mentioning that before. You know, there are various ways that we can show research evidence, and I'll point you to a guide that we have on that in the library. But thinking about, you know, whether maybe your work was presented or published alongside other researchers of high standing, you know, how many views did it get? How many attendees did it get? Those sorts of stats can be really useful. And you can see that Darren Verhagen's significance statement here does that. It mentions that the work won a Green Room Award, and then goes on to describe why that matters. So what, you know, not just that it was awarded, but it was awarded because the sound design challenged audiences, pushes discomfort. And then speaking about how the work was commissioned and funded, which are also really important signifiers of significance. I know I'm moving quite quickly through this, but I want to keep time for questions. But just to let you know, I'm here because in a sense, I'm kind of spruiking myself as a possible avenue of support here. So you can book in for a research support consultation, and I can help you with crafting or perhaps editing your statements, which I've done before for some of you who are in the room at the moment. And also want to let you know there's a research evidence guide that you might find useful through the library, and there are some statements there that you can look at. The researcher portal, of course, has some really excellent information, and again, the ERA submission guidelines are something to check out. And there's my email if you wanted to contact me directly. Yeah, thank you for that. And again, these slides will be sent to you so you can check them out in more detail. So with that, I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll pass back to Julienne.
Thanks so much, Steph, and that's really beautiful to see, in particular, those statements with the key sentences highlighted. And I think it really gives people a really clear example of how to articulate these various components that we're looking for to be there. And so we'll open up to Q&A now for the next 20 minutes or so. And so I think you can see we've got quite a bit of expertise in the room with the trio here, myself, Winnie and Steph, but also a number of senior academics with us in this group who may have some input with questions as well. So does anyone want to start us off with a simple or curly question, whichever you like? Just while we're waiting for a hand to go up or a comment to pop up, one of the things that was referenced in both Steph and Winnie's presentations was the evidence that you upload with the statement. And I just want to make a mention of that because quite often one of the problems that I face when I'm trying to assess whether something's eligible in my role with the Creative Works Policy Group is that sometimes the evidence is just missing. And, you know, I know you've got it, and some people forget to put it in, or they don't sort of think comprehensively enough about forms of evidence. So evidence can include, you know, the work or excerpts from the work, but it can also include evidence of peer review, reviews that you've had, awards that you've won for that work, and so on. And if later down the track you win an award after having reported the piece as well, you can still pop evidence into that evidence folder after, you know, the box has been ticked for ERA eligibility, and that really helps us with making the quality statements when we're putting forward our ERA submission as a university too. So don't forget to add info later too if you've got it. But Melody's got a hand up there, so I'll pass over to Melody.
Thanks everyone, that was amazing. Julienne, I have a question for you, which is just about the research statements that you spoke about from leaders in our discipline at the beginning. I'm just curious, I don't know whether I missed you saying this, but I'm not sure where you find them, because so I wonder if you could speak a little bit to how do you search for Maria Tumarkin's research statement, for example?
Yeah, it is hard to find the statements sometimes at other universities. So RMIT's repository is open to the public, and most are, and so a lot of these repositories are facilitated by the libraries of various universities. University of Melbourne, which is where Maria Tumarkin is based, has a public-facing repository, but they don't always include all the evidence. And so when I was looking just before this session to see, well, can I find an example of one of Maria's statements there? I couldn't. But what I would do is someone who's a specialist in the same discipline as her, you know, we know one another at other institutions. And so I, you know, if I wanted to find her statement and couldn't find it on the website, I'd simply send an email to Maria and say, listen, love that piece of work. You know, I'm wondering just, you know, peer-to-peer, how did you articulate that? Would you mind sending me the statement? And I've done that before and received that information. So it just depends on the particular university's approach. And so sometimes those statements are there and sometimes not. But just about every university does have something like the equivalent of our repository where that reported data is publicly available.
And sorry, just one thing finally. So in our own research repository, so if I was looking for one of your statements, for example, I would just search for your name in the research repository.
Be the easiest way to do it. Yes, and that would come up. Yep.
Thank you.
So yeah, Steph's agreeing that research repository at RMIT is really a good resource for statements, and it's helpful to look across at other disciplines too, just to see examples of various kinds of, you know, NTROs can take so many forms, and the particular angle that people take with their statements has many forms as well. So it is good to read across. So there's a hand up there from Anna, I think it is. Anna, did you want to ask?
Hi, yes, please. My question is just in terms of sort of pathways. So you know, I've got quite a few that I've got to sort of finish. And is the best way forward at this point now to familiarise myself with the resources that we've just been shown, those excellent resources, and then do my drafts, and then Steph looks at my drafts, and then I submit them? Is this the pathway, do you think?
I think that's a good approach,
Yep.
Although I would add in one thing which is missing there is just a conversation with some of your peers in your particular discipline. So when I say discipline there, I'm thinking about the FOR codes that you're aiming to mainly contribute to, and just sort of touch base with the person who's in charge of that code. It might be you, Anna, I'm not sure.
Well, I don't think that my NTROs are going to be cultural studies. I think they're going to have, because they're art exhibitions.
Yep.
So I don't know. So I think that they're probably going to be, I'm probably going to be talking to like Kit and Marnie, I think.
Yes. So
Grace.
In the School of Art. So I would just have a conversation with them about the body, especially if you've got quite a bit of stuff. Maybe make a half-hour or an hour coffee appointment with the person who's, you know, and you can find out who's in charge of the 4-digit FOR code via the researcher portal. That info is there. And I would just book a coffee with that person and say, look, this is what I've got. Here's how I'm approaching it. Here's how I'm going to package it up too, you know, because it may be that some pieces go into portfolios and so on, so that you've got that disciplinary expert input early on.
Okay.
Because otherwise what can happen is, so Steph can help you articulate the research, but she's not the disciplinary expert. So, but it will come to experts in that discipline at the college committee. And so if there's something sort of out of whack there that you haven't seen or that Steph hasn't seen, someone earlier on can not necessarily out of whack, maybe that's not the right phrase, but do you know what I mean? I know what you mean. To try and get it right the first time rather than have things come back and forth. I think a conversation with someone who knows how to do it in that field would be great.
Great,
and they might have some good examples to point you towards from RMIT researchers who are doing work in that field as well. And sometimes they're just little tips about, you know, if you've curated an exhibition. We had an output come up for discussion this morning. We just had the college meeting this morning, where somebody had curated an exhibition, and they put one of their own works was shown in that exhibition, and so they put it in two separate NTROs, and we said we agreed that's actually double dipping really. So that single work should have come in as part of the, you know, curated piece in that particular instance. It's, you know, everything is like, every output is unique, so there's no sort of one single answer to things, but some of those questions are the kinds of things that your disciplinary expert can help you with. And
I'll thanks, and I'll leave it for someone else to make a question, but I will just say about the double dipping point. I'm not sure if you were in the FOR leaders meeting when we were explicitly told by the ARC that we should do more double listing, because for our last round, we would only let something really go in one FOR code, and all the other submissions that rated more highly would use them for two, a lot more than we did. Yeah. And so the new strategy going forward is to double code them, because we are encouraged to do so. But I know that's a different point, but it just came into my mind. Anyway, it's someone else's turn. Thank you.
I can talk a bit about FORs as well, because there's a question from Alexandra about strategies for FORs as well. So for 2023, we have an ERA 2023 working group made up of the ADVCs and college ERA leaders. For DSC, it's Ralph Horn and Robert Crawford. So the idea is that we want to code each work to its most appropriate fields of research. We're not trying to game and, you know, boost up one particular field, and, you know, we're trying to look at the individual output itself and look at where does it really belong to and be true to that. And so in terms of coding it to multiple FORs, we will only do that for works that are truly interdisciplinary. We're not going to code every single thing to as many codes as it can be. We are looking at individual output to see where does it best belong to. And that's going to be the integrity that comes with the preparing a fully compliant submission. So that's the general RMIT position at the moment for 2023. So when you code your work, don't try and say, well, I want to contribute to a particular discipline. Just look at the work itself. Where does it sit the best in terms of discipline? That's the approach, I think.
Thanks, Winnie. And I can see there are a few hands up, but the name that's coming up on my screen at the moment is Michael Teague. Are you there, Michael?
Yes, Michelle Teague. Hello.
Michelle, sorry, I misread your name. Welcome.
So I'm based in Hanoi, and this is very interesting. I think in terms of some of the requirements, the context here is very different. So it's like get the evidence. There's more kind of barriers, I think, in terms of meeting the evidence that's outlined in comparison to if you were based in Melbourne. So I'm wondering, do you have any examples of people from Vietnam who have gone through this successfully?
We do have submissions. Yeah, we do have submissions from RMIT, Vietnam, Com and Design. We don't get many. We've just got one for this round from Nicholas Cope. Did a live performance. And Andrew Stiff is reviewing that with the RMIT Vietnam Creative Works panel. I think you have your own set of panels for panelists to review them. Yeah. So Andy will send me the outcome from that review for our consolidation.
That's very small. It's such a small team, so it's interesting having the review system is even because we're all working with each other.
Although interestingly, the quality rating guidelines and table, one of the reference docs that we used to generate our Melbourne version is from RMIT Vietnam. So good
to know. Okay, I'll follow up with Andy and talk to Nick as well. Okay, sure. Thank you.
All right.
Thanks, Michelle. It's good to have you here. There's a question from Jess Wilkinson as well. Are you there, Jess?
Oh yeah. Sorry, this is just something that's been occurring to me. And sorry if you covered this. I came in a bit late, but and it's about evidence and how. And because I've been a peer assessor for the ARC as well, so I've seen the other side of what you see when things come in from other different unis and seeing their different strategies. But there's this question of, say you have a book out, like a creative work, and then you submit it and it goes into the repository and it's collected, blah, 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 and you submit a certain amount of evidence at that time. But then there could be other things that work achieves. What is there an opportunity then to gather extra significance that would be of benefit to those works? Because that's something that I've never really come across, is how that's dealt with.
Yeah, absolutely, and I would really encourage you to do that, Jess. If you've got new news on the success of that work, then contact Winnie's office. So assuming that it's already been ticked as an ERA eligible work, you can add more evidence to the evidence folder, and you can actually revise the statement. And I would encourage you to particularly to revise the significance statement to show those quality indicators that have come in that are new.
Oh, sure.
Sometimes when we're in an ERA round, there's a call out. We send a call out saying, please do that if you've got new information. But mostly it's just sort of up to you to do that as the researcher.
I've never done that. That wasn't a question for me specifically. It was just it just occurred to me, like, what if people do kind of extra stuff? So sometimes you see colleagues being reviewed in like an amazing thing or whatever. I'm like, oh, I wonder if that's being collected. But so if that's my bad, that's not that I haven't kind of picked that up or that notification. But it's like
you just email.
So you just email.
You just send email to me or to pubs at RMIT, and it's a very manual process. You email us, we add the evidence, and we revise the statement to reflect the new evidence. That's all.
Yeah, cool. Do you think it would be of benefit having, or maybe it already is there and I've just been kind of, absent-minded, but do you think it would be worth having a line there under the creative works where it says for revisions?
Yep, that's fine. Oh, sorry, you mean in the actual statement itself?
Or when you submit things through that web page that you showed with the different types of outputs. If there's a line there saying, do you have revisions, send.
No, you don't need to fill out the form again. You just email us directly, because whenever you fill in another output on the form, it generates a new output, which is not what we want. We just want to revise the old one.
Yep. But maybe your point is just to let people know that it's possible. So maybe in the maybe that should come in the official communication back when we say something's ERA eligible, to have an extra sentence in there that says, by the way, if you come across more quality related information on this output, please let us know. This is how to do it. I think
I'll make a note of that.
That'd be amazing, I think, because now I think of all the past things. I'm sure there's lots of people who do that who haven't kind of updated.
And the other thing that reminds me, Jess, of another point I wanted to make, which is about thinking about, for those of you that have been doing this for a few years already, I strongly recommend periodically going back and rereading the research statements and just going over the research narrative, thinking about the research narrative that you're creating through those statements as kind of pieces of a puzzle that are connecting together. Because one of the things that assessors see, because they see 5 years worth of outputs at one time, they are actually reading some of those statements as a continuous narrative. And if they are too similar to one another, which is the most common problem I see as someone who sees a lot of these statements coming across my desk. So often people will have a research field that they're mainly contributing to and a research interest that's big, and so a lot of their NTROs relate to that research interest. But what we don't want is for each new output to sort of sound like you're just going over the same ground. So starting to think about how this new output you're about to report adds to or changes some aspect of the trajectory you were on with the NTROs that came before. I think that's a really great thing to do, and it's to reread your own statements periodically, and also to think about that in relation to other research narratives you're putting together for other purposes, like for ARC ropes or for promotion applications and so on. Go back and see what sort of record you're creating, of where you've come from and where you're heading next. And I think that can help you too to figure out where to best invest your time in the next sort of set of outputs that you're going to produce as well, so that there's a story there, and that it also means that you can feel more in the driver's seat, because a lot of this stuff is really kind of, you know, policy heavy and kind of process heavy and so on. And if you can sort of make yourself feel like you're a bit more in control here, it's a positive thing. We're just about out of time. Anna, you've got your hand up again? Did you? Is that a new question or an old
sorry, it's the old question. Sorry.
Okay. No worries at all. And I haven't quite clicked back to the chat, but is there anything in the chat?
There was a comment that URLs shouldn't be submitted as documentation. What if the work is an online work?
Yeah, then you'll send screenshots. Just because URLs, we're not going to be expecting people at the ERC to click on URLs. So you can just send us screenshots, and that's better. Also, a lot of URLs, you know, go out of date and we can't access them, and yeah, screenshots.
Sometimes I've seen quite successful PowerPoint presentations which will show a few screenshots or, you know, a few photographs or a few audio files or whatever to get us sort of a 360 degrees sense of a work that we can't sort of actually get our hands in. You know, say it's an app or something, I don't know, but if you've got a work that's a little bit unusual, think about how somebody who hasn't seen it before might, you know, how you might want to represent it to them and what the best way is with that. When you don't want to make, you know, a huge amount of new labour for yourself just to report, but at the same time, you're doing all of us a service in kind of trying to really get across the quality of what you've actually achieved with your NTRO. So I'll just take that one last question from Francesca and then we'll need to finish up. But for this ERA, do we have a chance to look at what is being submitted to do any final revision?
Yeah, so in 2018, what happened was when the FOR advisors selected the top 30%, there was a small team within DSC that edited and, you know, made all the, you know, the supporting evidence look really pretty. So there is a final chance then to do final revisions. And if we need to, we can contact individual researchers for revisions. But for 2018, the DSC team did it for everyone in the top 30% works.
Okay, thanks, Winnie, and thanks everyone for coming. We'll need to finish up there, and I hope that's given you a sort of a nice kind of intro or revision to the whole process. And Marie Scott, who's our research support person for this particular event, will send around an email with those 3 slide decks attached so that you can look back through those. And yeah, and just get in touch with any of us if further questions come up. And thanks again very much to Winnie and to Steph for joining us.
Thank you. Thanks for organising it.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
Have a great afternoon.
You too.
Bye, bro.
Bye, all.